The house next door to our left is on fire. The house to the right is on fire. In fact, all the houses in the estate are on fire. And we have a plan from the government to deal with that fire, which fundamentally says that if the others start to try and put the fires out in their houses, well, then we will try to put out some of the fire in our house by 2050. That's what the plan represents. And for those who say, well, we should give it a guarded welcome because at least they're talking about trying to put out some of the fire on some of the house by 2050, the point is that our house and all of the homes will be burnt down by that time. You just look at the news every single week, the haunting image of the polar bear in Norilsk in northern Siberia, forced further south than I think for 40 years because of the devastation of their sea ice habitat and forced to forage for food on land. The story of the permafrost in the Arctic, which is thawed 70 years earlier than they expected to thaw it. And then you have this approach which is just so completely inadequate because it's trapped within this system, this capitalist system, which is based on production for profit. The attitude to the target for 2050 is exactly parallel to the attitude to dealing with Ireland's status as a corporate tax haven and the race to the bottom in corporate tax rates. The government says correctly this is an international problem, it needs to be dealt with globally, but then they use that as an excuse to hold off on any action until it happens elsewhere. 2050, even if they were to say, yes, we're going for 2050, is completely inadequate. We need a target of a zero carbon economy by 2030. One of the areas that I think it's clearest how you're completely trapped in this model of organising society, this model of organising the economy is in relation to transport, where the most ambitious thing you can think of is not to change the model of how people get around, not to challenge the model of individual car usage. It's to double the number of electric vehicles that you're planning to have on the road, to say we're going to have 1 million electrical vehicles on the road. It is not the answer, Minister. It really, really is not the answer. If you look at all the problems that come with electric vehicles, if you look at the very carbon-intensive nature of production of electric vehicles, if you look at the environmental impact of the mining for the rare earths that go into electric vehicles, if you look at the huge labour abuses, human rights abuses, child labour that goes on in the extraction of those rare earths, it is not the answer. The answer is to shift to public transport on a massive scale. And it's the one thing that the government very clearly, Minister Ross, ruled out on the day of the plan to say, no, we're definitely not going to go down the free public transport route. Why not? 100 cities around the world have gone that way. We need significant further investment and we need to make it free to change the model of how people get around. The same in terms of carbon taxes. All you can envisage is just taxing ordinary people, which will be a regressive taxation which will have no substantial impact whatsoever on emissions. And then the real polluters, the 100 companies responsible for 71% of global emissions since 1988, you're going to do nothing about them. There's nothing about them. The idea that we just allow society to continue to be run in their interests, that they get to pollute, they get to treat nature as an externality that they don't have to take care of. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever unless you're unwilling to break, of course, from that capitalist system that clearly should be taken into public ownership and planned democratically for people and for planet. The same in terms of agriculture. You acknowledge the problem. You acknowledge the fact that agriculture is our biggest emitting sector. But you don't have any plan, you don't have any target to reduce the herd. The herd absolutely needs to be reduced, and substantially. That is unavoidable if you're going to tackle emissions from Ireland. And that can only be done by, again, challenging the drive for private profit, by public ownership of the major agri-corporations, and by assisting small farmers to ensure they have no loss of income, but can transition to a sustainable model of agriculture, investment in afforestation, and so on. What conclusion to draw from this is that a government that is committed to the rules of capitalism, to the rule of profit, is not going to deal with this issue. They're going to continue to block measures like the Keep It in the Ground bill because it challenges the interests of big oil. The same will come up every single time we attempt to do what's necessary. And so the movement has to continue to be built, it has to grow, and has to be armed with eco-socialist policies and ultimately fight for a socialist government with eco-socialist policies to implement it. The next big step with that is Friday the 20th of September, which has been called as the next day of climate strike action. That should be climate strike action by school students, yes, absolutely, but the trade unions now need to follow their lead, bring their weight, bring their power into action and have action from below to demand change.
And check to Tommy Brown.